Eli Lake of the New York Sun, filling in for Richard Miniter.
I'm Michelle Cottle of the New Republic, filling in for David Corn. Welcome to the Corn Miniter Show for PajamasMedia.com. Despite the fact that it's August in Washington, there's a lot going on this week. And first up, we're going to argue about this Hillary Clinton snafu. The Netroots is up in arms because she made a positive comment about the surge, and this has not gone over well. Talk to me about this, Eli.
Well, it's interesting because in a speech before the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the kind of audience where you would expect something positive to be said about the war, and all, she really echoed the conventional wisdom. Richard Durbin has said this sort of thing. James Clyburn said, well, I hope Petraeus doesn't have a positive report. You're seeing plenty of Democrats conceding that, at least on the military side, the surge seems to be really bearing fruit. There still is not this sort of political reconciliation. Hillary has made that very clear. But it's interesting from the perspective of the Netroots, which can't even hear a little bit of good news, even if it's coming from our commanders in the field.
This is just kind of a general issue that we're seeing now. I mean, for the Netroots, obviously, Hillary is a problematic person. I mean, she's the party front runner, but she hasn't been as liberal as they'd like, or it's authentic, I believe is the term that you get bandied around a lot. But just more broadly, this war has gotten so crazy, and the discussion over this war has gotten so polarizing that nobody can make any kind of concession that doesn't erupt into some massive squabble.
Well, I find it interesting to a certain degree that the substantive position demanded by the Netroots is to essentially to betray all of these people that we briefly liberated. And secondly, I kind of wonder, is this contingency really that powerful or relevant in a general election? I think they become sister soldiers as soon as the Democrats have a nominee, and they'll be running as fast as they can from the Netroots because they're really not where most of the American voting populace is at this point.
And I agree. On some level, that's the way it is on both sides. So,
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
right now you
Exactly.
see the Republicans having to do some psychotic tap dance to please the base. I mean, you have Mitt Romney flip-flopping on every issue. You have Rudy Giuliani pretending he's going to throw immigrants over the wall, and all of this is in service of the primary nomination. And the minute they get this primary nomination, you're going to wind up with them back in the middle, which is where they have to be to win a general election. And at some point you have to ask yourself, when are we going to accept that this process is just too crazy for a normal person to have any hope of making a go at it?
Well, here's something interesting. The latest Gallup poll comes out and it says that Congress has a lower than 20% approval rating overall as an institution. The White House not doing much better. The one guy with more credibility in Washington is coming here in September, and that's General David Petraeus. When they've polled on him, twice as many Americans have a positive or favorable impression than they do a negative impression. I think that's got a lot to do with the fact that a lot of people in Congress are really hedging their bets. Here's another thing to consider. A lot of the seats that gave the Democrats the majority that they lost in 1994 came from Republican and conservative districts. They can't vote on a lot of things the way the Netroots would. Now, if the Democratic Party wants to be the party that will always be guaranteed wins in Madison, Wisconsin, San Francisco, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, then go ahead and follow the advice of the Daily Kos, the Huffington Post, and whatever. But I think that for someone who's seriously trying to be the next president of the United States, at a certain point you got to kick these people to the curb.
Well, and if you look at what the Democratic candidates are doing, you don't see a lot of them clamoring for immediate and full withdrawal. I mean, they're being very careful about how they phrase it, but it's
Absolutely.
very clear that President Hillary would leave troops in Iraq for a while. It's just there's no way around kind of the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and keep in mind that just from a sort of perspective of how Hillary Clinton, is sort of governed before and sort of what defines the Democratic Party today, the Clinton administration was perfectly willing to use unilateral force to do nation building and the very kinds of things that will probably be required for Iraq. So, the dreams of sort of getting out of Iraq, I think, are really sort of going down the drain at this point, and it hasn't caught on as much with the intensity with the rest of the population.
Yeah, and I think obviously on the Netroots, on both sides, you have kind of a self-selecting group
Sure.
that feels really passionately and tends toward the fringes on a lot of these things. If you get on the
Right.
chat boards and the web streams for like redstate.com or any of this, what you find are people who feel really intensely. This is how they spend their day, kind of hanging out, talking about this stuff.
Right.
And so, naturally, these are the people who are going to be most upset about this sort of thing. But I'm fascinated by how this is going to play out in the 2008 election, because these are not, Ron Paul is the champion of the Netroots on some level, and this is not where the rest of America is.
I have some bad news for the Ron Paul 08 contingent. I don't think your guy's going to get very far. I mean, it's just, Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways the internet has this sort of effect of playing up, because we measure now support with web hits and how many people are sort of logging in to various websites for the campaign. It does tend to attract people to fringe candidates, which I think in a sort of primary process we've yet to see that actually translate. Keep in mind, the big Netroot candidate for 2006 was Ned Lamont.
Yeah, and the trick will be this time around to see how well the mainstream candidates use this. I mean, John Edwards was really putting a lot of effort in with Elizabeth Edwards likes to blog, and so they were courting the Netroots and the Daily Kos. All the candidates went there.
Right.
Fred Thompson says he's going to be doing, to some extent, an above the snow campaign where it's very tech heavy, blogging, webcast, that kind of thing, instead of the door to door in Iowa and New Hampshire. So it's going to be interesting to watch the strategies for courting people who are kind of naturally inclined to go toward, the purists.
Well, it is a great opportunity. The internet is a great way for a lot of candidates, I think, to recruit a group of people who are going to be activists. People put up, these signs, volunteer, stuff envelopes, and so forth. And that is in very ways a useful way that you have to build an organization. You've got to get the committed people to sort of convince, the people in the middle. But at the same time, what their issues are not going to reflect what I think most Americans are going to agree with at a certain point. And at a certain point, I think you're going to see a sort of moment where there's going to be a huge temper tantrum on the left, and they're going to say, the Democrats are yet again abandoning us. When will they ever learn? And then nothing's going to happen. You know what I mean? Nothing will happen at all. They're going to still vote for this guy. They're not going to do Nader again. You know what I mean? They're going to say, God forbid, we won't get another Republican. And Democrats probably have a good chance in 08.
Well, Howard Dean proved that you can have the enthusiasm and the energy, and
Sure.
It doesn't necessarily translate. In fact, there was some concern that his Iowa, ground troops didn't actually go over that well with the locals when they did. And it's going to be interesting this time around as well. Also, you have the factor of, as much as young people and the energy of the Netroots helps you along the way, still, I'm sorry, the people out there voting in the end of the day are the old folks. I mean, it's just like the numbers on who are voting, it's something like some scandalous percentages, like 70% are over 45 and whatever.
Right.
Not that these aren't people on the web.
What you really have to worry about is the carrier pigeon campaign. That's where you're going to get your real voters. So the last question, I think, Michelle, is who's going to get more hate mail from this discussion, you or me?
Well, I'm gonna actually make sure they have your email address for all of this,
Okay.
so you can get mine as well.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks for this week. Well, we'll see you next time.
For
Or actually,
Pajamas Media,
hopefully you'll get rich and David.
Yeah, for pajamasmedia.com, I'm Elie Lake.
I'm Michelle Cottle.